Okay, so for those of you that will be watching this recording, I have asked one of my former cadets who was a superstar as a cadet, but also then went on to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point, and then had a very successful Army career, retiring within the last brief period of time. And so this is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Luis Fregroso. And welcome, Colonel. Thank you for joining me. Maybe you could just start by giving us a little bit of an overview of your Army career. Sort of the abbreviated bio that that gets read at passing reviews and that sort of thing. You just sort of tell us a little bit about after you left the cadet program, you went to West Point, and I'll let you pick it up from there.
Absolutely. So I graduated in 1995, and immediately after that, went to Fort Sill, where I was trained as an artillery officer. So from that point, as an artillery officer, I had the great honor of leading soldiers in numerous positions, to include platoon leader, battery commander, battalion commander, and like most officers, several staff positions. I deployed to Iraq 4 times in different units and various positions. My career culminated as part of the Army Cyber Command. My staff position is primarily focused on planning and operations, but my heart is still really close to the artillery work.
Well, I've certainly, shared with you how incredibly proud I am of you. You are a really remarkable man, and certainly were a superstar as a cadet leader. And I take a great deal of pride in knowing that you came from the Los Angeles area, went to El Sereno Junior High, middle school, and then went on to Wilson High School. And so you certainly know the community, and you know the students that attend North Valley Military. Certainly very much the same demographic that you grew up in at El Sereno. So I've got some questions I wanted to pose, and I'm going to start with what are some of those most important leadership lessons that you learned when you were actually a cadet that you think really served you well in your career in the Army, and now as you've moved into the business sector? What are some of those leadership lessons?
When I think back to my time, I think probably the most critical lessons were the leadership principles and leadership traits that we had to memorize as young cadets.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second here. Cadets, this is why I tell you have to memorize the 14 leadership traits and the 11 leadership principles. Okay, go ahead, Colonel.
To that point, I used to make all my officers, whoever worked for me, memorize those exact same principles and traits, even though the Army has modified them as time goes on. Those traits and principles were so important for me and resonated because of the way they were reinforced, and they just fit really well into different leadership situations that were given to me, not only as a cadet, but even as an officer at all levels where I worked. It gives you kind of a center to be able to focus on and be able to move from. Because it really helped. Every single situation is different, but when you have some basic principles and traits to focus on, you can always adjust from that same area.
Are there any other particular leadership experiences or lessons that stick out? Any particular events or
Absolutely.
experiences?
There's several of them. There's one in particular that I really enjoyed. It was 11th grade or going to 11th grade. I was selected to be the summer camp OCS commander, and incidentally, the highest position I did get the opportunity to lead was to be the actual camp commander. But my favorite position was actually the OCS commander, primarily because I was given full autonomy to do whatever I needed to do in regards to training the OCS candidates. I could lay out. I was able to lay out the lessons. I was able to determine how we were going to plan them, and I know that there was some supervision that was going on behind the scenes. But the fact that I had the opportunity to make mistakes and learn just really helped me in honing those logistical skills, those leadership skills, the attributes that really help a person be the best leader that they can be. As a whole, I mean, as I think about it, what I really appreciated the most about my time as a cadet is just having those opportunities to lead, because you would not be, well, maybe some people will be surprised, but a lot of people who join the Army have never really led anything in their life, and they'll put on their resumes or applications that they've led some school activity or something in their hometown, which is fine, but it's different than when you're leading something that we were able to lead in the cadet corps, and I'm sure that you're allowing your students to lead in your organization, because what we did was much more thorough, where you planned out in advance, in some cases a year out in advance, and you taught classes to the leaders, and you trained the trainers, and saw it all the way through to execution, and conducted the after-action reviews, the full gamut of responsibilities that leaders have to do from the smallest to the biggest. We got to practice that as cadets, as teenagers, quite frankly, and we were more ready when we joined the military than most people that have been there for years already, and I can give you some insights into that as well.
So, one of the things that I am constantly trying to do with the cadets here at North Valley is to impress upon them the idea that if they have any interest in serving in the military after high school, that options like the United States Military Academy at West Point are really amazing opportunities, and places like West Point are not easy to get a nomination and gain admission, but we here at NVMI are really trying hard to impress upon our cadets that setting that sort of college goal is worthwhile, and though not everybody will necessarily gain a nomination, not everyone will necessarily gain admission. As many of the cadets will be watching this, you all will remember Giovanni Perez, who's now going to be a yuck at West Point, and he graduated from NVMI, and we are constantly trying to say to our cadets, that's a really good goal to shoot for. Can you just share any insights? I mean, you came from this area, this broader area of Los Angeles. You had a life experience that was very, very similar to the life experiences that our cadets are having. And frankly, many of our cadets, for a variety of reasons, see something like West Point and say, that's just out of reach for me. I can't do that. That's too much. It's too a bridge too far. It's too high in aspiration. I can't achieve that because that expectation is just too great for me. So, you're living proof that young people from schools like this are absolutely capable of gaining admission and going to and being successful at one of the top universities in the world. So could you just share a little bit about, what your thoughts are about maybe why young people should consider that as one of the possible paths for themselves?
Absolutely. There's two aspects that I'll cover. First, the first aspect will be about what they gain personally. But the second aspect, and I want to spend extra time on this, is why our military and our country needs your students to be officers in the United States Army. And warning up front, I may get a little bit passionate and when I start talking about that because, I'll wait till I get to that. But as individuals, when I was a young man, teenager, I never left California. The only time I left Los Angeles were during my opportunities with the California Cadet Corps. And I did not know how much I didn't understand about not only the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. And I also didn't understand the differences in the situation that I was in compared to maybe some of the opportunities that are out in other locations. And so when looking at different schools and possibilities that are out there, first thing I'll tell all of your students is it's absolutely attainable. And for me, when I looked at going to West Point, and it sounds kind of funny, but when I heard that they cover all of your expenses, to me that was a no-brainer. I was like, wow, they cover everything? Heck yeah, that's awesome. And several years later, I found out that some of my colleagues who graduated from other schools and got their commissions, and even those that I met after who were civilians, they were paying their debt for 15, 20 years, paying off college. So an opportunity like going to West Point, if why not try? Definitely try to get in there and get that opportunity. And I will be among the first to say that you'll get good officers from every commissioning source without a doubt. But one of the advantages of going to West Point is that you have a huge cadre dedicated to helping every single cadet to be the best officer that they can be in the United States Army. More importantly, and I don't think you can say this for all the other schools, but at West Point, not only are you there with a bunch of brilliant, intelligent young men and women, they're all physically fit. They're all natural leaders. I mean, you really have to bring up your game, and you can't help but improve yourself when you're inside of that bubble with such great individuals, and you build these friendships, which I'm sure is happening in your school, but the opportunities are just incredible. So if your students are considering going to college, and I highly recommend that you do, because if you don't know it yet, going to college opens up so many doors. And I apologize. Let me just share one story. I think it was in 10th grade. My family was having a tough time, and I actually and as a young man, was doing some soul searching and was trying to decide whether I should leave high school and get a job so that I could help my family, or go out and go to school and maybe I can help afterwards. And I've got to tell you, the amount of help that I can provide to my family now, not only financially, but also with the knowledge that I've gained because of that education and because of the contacts with friends that also have knowledge bases. It's just incredible. The doors open up. You really should take advantage of opportunities like that if you can. So I would highly recommend it. Now switching gears to why our Army needs individuals like your students to be there. So it took a little while for me to figure out why something felt different about the way I saw things in Fregroso. I was a junior officer, actually even more as a senior officer now that I think about it. But I had a completely different perspective on a lot of ways to approach things. So the Army does more than just fight our nation's battles. Sometimes it does humanitarian actions. Sometimes here in the United States it does some effort or some operations, and it has to take into consideration how we approach it. We have to plan it. And there's a lot of people, especially in the officers' ranks, who don't understand what 90% of our country experiences in regards to some of the challenges. And what I mean by challenges is I'll just say it. Sometimes it's hard to make sure that you have enough money to pay the rent, or enough money to get food. And I'm not saying that your students are having that issue. I'm really speaking about my situation, because I know I felt that, and there may be some of your students who may be feeling those kind of burdens as well. But when I interacted with my colleagues, especially as I raised in rank, it became clear that they did not understand those perspectives. They didn't understand why people would not be able to just pay for their own medical care, or why people would complain about some basic need for some jobs or opportunities, and that your students coming into that the officer ranks will help to level set that gap. But more importantly, on numerous occasions, I had soldiers come up to me and they would tell me, "Sir, you're different. Sir, you understand. Sir, you know what it's like to be us." And what's different though is that usually those kind of comments are given to an OCS grad, somebody who's been in their ranks and one of them. And I didn't graduate from OCS. I went to West Point and got a direct position. And but what's different is my experience, is my where I came from, and I'm telling you, we need individuals who have that perspective to get up there, to bring a little bit of reality to the officer ranks. I mean, it's a must. I'll give one more example, if you don't mind. I was in Fort Leavenworth. I was in the Commanding General Staff College, and we were having a discussion about capitalism. And part of the discussion was in regards to hey, it's all about getting money, and you know, this is why we're the richest nation. And I brought up the point, said, well, yeah, we're the richest nation, but potentially some other countries are hurting because of that. But you know, it is what it is. But I don't think you guys realize that capitalism also kind of hurts a little bit in our own country. And I'm not saying capitalism is wrong. That's the case. But there's winners and losers, and the game can be a little bit unfair sometimes. And I gave him an example. I was in junior high, obviously as a young man, and I remember a friend of mine had broke his arm, and the next day he came in a homemade sling because he couldn't afford to get to go to the hospital. And it's these kind of things that my peers, and these were majors in the United States Army, who did not understand that this kind of stuff was happening in our nation. So your students, please tell them, remind them, let them know that if they have the drive, if they have the desire, if they can lead, encourage them to become officers and to help lead our young men and women, in our armed services, because they need those kind of leaders. And I'm not saying that there aren't good leaders out there, but we need to round out the perspective of what is out there.
I really appreciate that, because I think that part of being a big part of being a good leader is empathy, perspective taking. Part of the reason we read literature is that it gives us the perspective of different characters. And part of what I think is lacking from a lot of our institutions in the United States and in the world is that inability to take perspective, because people haven't necessarily, to use an expression, walked a mile in their shoes. And certainly you walked a mile in the shoes of somebody from Los Angeles, somebody who grew up in a very similar kind of situation to the students here at NVMI. In follow-up to that, one of the struggles that I sometimes have in my discussions with our students is that there are plenty of Army and Marine Corps and Navy and Air Force recruiters out in the neighborhood, and they are saying to people at NVMI, come enlist in the Marine Corps, come enlist in the Army, come enlist in the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, Coast Guard, whatever. And one of the comments that I've tried to convey to people is that, one of the perspectives I've tried to convey is that, we need enlisted troops. The Army functions because of amazing, incredible enlisted troops who do a preponderance of the work to help our nation to fight the wars, to fulfill the various missions. But we also need a strong officer corps that is the managerial level of the organization. And I am constantly trying to say to my students, if you really do want to serve in the military, my biggest encouragement is to go become an officer. And because with that commission, you have that college education, you take on a true leadership role, a true management role, and you are able to hopefully have a bigger impact on shaping the Army, shaping subsets of the Army, shaping the world we live in, which you don't necessarily and can't necessarily do to anywhere near the same extent that you could if you were an enlisted troop. And again, that's not to say anything disparaging about enlisted troops, because you know they're the backbone of any military organization. But you have to have quality leadership and management, and the officer corps really takes that role and ultimately shapes the the direction of the organization. And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about or any advice for my cadets who may be thinking, well, I'm not going to go to college. I'm just going to go ahead and enlist. It's immediate money. Now I can help my family because I've got this immediate money. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, absolutely. So let me first echo what you said. The American non-commissioned officers are amazing. They are the envy of every single country's military. Our NCOs, our enlisted members are amazing. There's nothing, we could not win our wars without them. There's just no doubt about that. When you take into account what you can influence, the way you come into the military in regards to whether you enlist or you become an officer has a great deal of difference. And so, just to contrast a little bit, if you enlist in the Army, yes, you may get a bonus. There's some bonuses that are pretty lucrative, but they're finite bonuses. And you're a private, maybe you can get promoted a little bit higher, private first class, depending on some of the criteria if you qualify. And you're a young soldier that's there to follow orders and do what they got to do. In contrast, a second lieutenant in the United States Army is put in charge of a 30-person platoon. And that platoon leader is asked to be in charge of and sign for millions of dollars of property. And that platoon leader, that second lieutenant, is asked to take on numerous additional duties that he or she will need to research and understand and have legal ramifications if they're not done appropriately. Now, don't get me wrong, they'll be mentored, they'll be taken care of, they'll be given some tools to help them along, because those are very important requirements. But there's a huge difference between the responsibilities of that second lieutenant and that private. Another thing to consider: why do we put that second lieutenant as a platoon leader right away and give him a platoon sergeant, an E7 in the United States Army who has been in the Army usually about 15 years or so, if not more, as his right-hand man or woman, depending on the organization that we're in. And it's to train that second lieutenant, because that second lieutenant has the potential to be one of the future Army's generals. Because our Army, it's our generals who dictate the strategy that our Army will follow. Now, don't get me wrong, our enlisted members, they'll grow up to be first sergeants and sergeants majors, and they do amazing things. But it's the generals and the colonels that run the Army and dictate policy and make the decisions that affect every single soldier from E1 to the general officer. We, like I said earlier, we need people with perspective, a full, well-rounded perspective that can get into those positions so that they, put in policies that take into account that, the perspective from, the entire country, not just, certain aspects of our country, not just certain income levels of our country, not just, certain, ideologies. Pick your choice of which ones are the biggest demographic in the Army right now. So the bottom line is that I know, because of who you are, sir, and how you train and how you care about every single person that you're charged to lead and educate, that your students will be among the best leaders in our country, whether they join the military or not. But if they choose to join the military, those leaders are best suited to influence the larger populations in the military. They're suited to be put in positions where they can influence the most soldiers. And those positions, in general, are in the officers' ranks, starting with second lieutenant. So, like I said earlier, the Army needs your students if they're looking to join into the military to go into the officer corps.
I'm just going to make a little bit of a kind of a side comment here. My students have heard me say that when you think about leadership in corporate America and leadership in organizations like the United States Army, the truth of the matter is the majority of leadership is still old white guys like me. It is not black and brown men and women who actually really now represent the majority of our fighting force, the majority of the people working for many of these large corporations. And part of what I keep saying to people, and so I appreciate you reinforcing it, is just this idea that just like students like seeing somebody who looks like them in charge and being a role model for them, one of the great benefits of our students becoming officers in the military is that they then become the role models for that young private, those individuals who look up to that leader, and it becomes an opportunity to set an example in a way that can't easily be replicated. So I realize we're both sort of singing the same song, but I think one of the things that frankly makes me very sad sometimes is that we have students who, some of whom really don't believe that they are as capable as I believe them to be. And what you just described about, how capable these young people can be as leaders, I know that. I know from experience that our young people can step into these roles and be tremendous leaders because of all the different life experiences and school experiences and leadership experiences they've had as cadets. And I just encourage people to not feel limited by their own perceptions of inadequacy, or their belief that that's just beyond my reach. You are evidence that it is not beyond their reach. You are one of these amazing young people, and you became a highly successful, decorated Army officer who went on to make a huge difference in the various aspects of the Army where you served. The next question, even when you were a cadet, I remember talking to you about the importance of failure, and I talked to my cadets about failure and how oftentimes we learn more from failure than we learn from anything else. Can you just share any particular poignant experiences of failure, maybe back when you were a middle school, high school cadet, or experience a failure at uh, West Point, failure as a platoon leader, failure as a company commander, staff officer, battalion commander, just any particular failure experiences that stick with you and that are particularly powerful and meaningful to you?
So I'll caveat or start with saying that while there's situations where you fail and the leaders need to figure out how to fix them and move forward with the current situation to rectify it or make it better. So that's my little caveat to say that even though I have failed numerous times, I've been able to overcome, and as I'm sure all of your students will as well. So I do remember there was one. I don't remember if I was in 10th or 11th grade, and we were running, ironically, a leadership school, and we had our normal group of cadets that would come help us to run the leadership school. But this particular event, we brought in some additional members. We knew who they were, and they were known individuals in character, not bad people, but they weren't always part of our discussions. And after the first day in the evening, I was went around making some checks, and I went into the hallway, and luckily it was the beginning of this situation. I saw a couple of cadre members taking out several of the students and having them do push-ups, get books and hold them with their arms extended, and basically we're starting to haze them. And I lost it. I started screaming. I told them, stop, you guys could be rude. I scolded those individuals, and obviously, the kibosh to that situation. But the failure, as in that situation, it's about environment. And I know that the regulars that work with us would not ever think about doing something like that. But where I failed as the person in charge or the cadet in charge of that leadership school was to make sure that the new individuals were, for lack of a better term, onboarded so that they understood what the appropriate leadership aspects they should be demonstrating in a leadership school. And I bring this particular one up because your students will face this, and they'll see this in the Army. They'll see this in the civilian world. Many of you guys may be familiar with what happened in Abu Ghraib. I actually had in several different organizations. I used the Stanford prison experiment. I would use that as a officer professional development because some people just when they're in charge, they don't realize that they're doing stuff that is wrong. So that's the bottom line is that was clearly I'm in charge, and I should have done something to prevent this or mitigate this from happening, but I didn't think about it, so I would consider that a leadership failure. And at the end, a lot of times the leadership failures come in, assuming that your leader wants to do well, wants to do right, and genuinely cares. A lot of these, leadership failures or challenges come into because you may have just didn't know or didn't anticipate it. And this is why having a mentor and something that I failed in, I never really reached out to get a mentor because the way I grew up, you took care of business yourself, and you didn't really ask for help. You just did things on your own, which if any of you guys are feeling that same kind of sentiment, I recommend that you now and in the future, consider looking for mentors and people who give you advice. Another leadership failure that I had, this is when I was a junior officer. I didn't realize I felt so bad about this. So one of the things that I've always been the type of individual who would want to help the team, just like one of the basic ideas, right? Be willing to do what you tell your subordinates to do, right? The very basic type of principle. And so I would do a lot of work that may have been something that I should have delegated down to a supporting group or supporting member. And one of the things when a 360 survey was done, I would ask everybody to fill in the survey. And a comment that kept popping up was not delegating. I was surprised by this because I thought I was a pretty good delegator. And I started talking to individuals. I regularly did counseling with everybody. I rated directly and I secret rated. And I would ask them, hey, I keep seeing this thing pop up. What is this all about? And after a little cajoling, because they want to be respectful, and you got to kind of pull it out of them after a little bit of cajoling. They would tell me that when they would see me doing all this extra stuff, that they thought or that they felt that I didn't trust them, and that was far from what I intended to do, and it was the exact opposite. I was trying to help them, and instead it was the opposite effect. So, from that aspect, I thought that was a leadership failure because that caused a little bit of frustration within the ranks. And, I had to learn that. I would have never picked that up if I hadn't done my counseling with my subordinates, as well as been open about wanting honest feedback with my patient surveys. Another leadership failure when I was more in my field grade officer ranks, and this. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the three Army forms of leadership: direct leadership, organizational leadership, strategic leadership. This is more towards the organizational leadership, where you're working with different organizations and trying to lead them into unity of effort and trying to get them on security. There's this idea of socializing that I just wasn't very. I just didn't worry about telling other people or trying to get buy-in. If I had a good idea and I knew it's good for the organization, hey, we're just going to do it. That causes problems, right? Because, if somebody doesn't like it, or even if they like it, but they're just like, this guy think he is, then that causes enemies, right? Or people pushing back just for the sake of pushing back sometimes. And that was, from an organization leadership perspective, a leadership failure, and that was a tough lesson that I had to fix really fast.
It's fascinating. So much of what you commented on, I have parallels in my own leadership experience, and I'm often. People will see me out at lunch supervision. I'm picking up trash, and people are saying, "You shouldn't be doing that. Why are you doing that?" I'm like, "Because the trash needs to be picked up. It's no big deal. Let's just get it done. This place needs to be clean, And I've got some people who are rather offended at the notion that I'm picking up trash because they say, "Well, no, other people should be doing that." And it's interesting you talk about the socialization piece because. I am somebody who has a pretty clear vision of what I want this school to be, and I try to move that vision forward. And sometimes I do it just by pure willpower, but I haven't necessarily gotten the buy-in, and that's a very it's a problem, you know. It certainly doesn't result in the kind of true buy-in, and you can't really move things forward if you don't have everybody buying into your mission and to the, you know, what you're hoping to accomplish. So I guess it's sort of fascinating that both of those are common failures that you and I have. When you and I talked over the phone the last time, you mentioned that there were some things that you learned as a cadet, which then, especially when you got into the more senior military ranks of, you know, being a major, lieutenant colonel, you know, having command of a battalion, being involved in some of these staff roles that were, you know, at a large organizational level. You mentioned that there were some lessons that you learned that didn't necessarily really prepare you for some of the political realities that you faced when you got to that level of leadership. I don't know if you've got any insights on that, or want to add to that at all, or give some examples of that. But I thought that was a fascinating comment that you made, so I wanted to give you a chance to kind of react to that.
So the first thing I'll say is that I did not realize that the military would have any sorts of politics involved in it at all. And as I didn't really start seeing it till I became a senior major, where politics was definitely a little bit of a factor in not only outside of, you know, Army to outside, but even within the Army, there was a little bit of politics. And I got two examples I can share with you. But in regards to, it's not so much that the lessons I learned were bad, but I think maybe another way to say it, the lessons that I learned were used against me by somebody who had a malicious way of using it for the sake of gaining some sort of political gain or something along those lines. So I'll give you an example. So one of the lessons that I've learned that I believe in wholeheartedly, I used it today in my civilian job, is that when something good happens, you give credit to your subordinates or the peers, people that you work with. You give them all the credit. You know, oh, that was all done by them. They did great. But if something bad happens, you take the blame for it. You know, it's my fault. I messed up. I forgot this. And I think, I personally believe good leaders do this because it provides what's known as top cover for their teammates and their subordinates. And you need to do this to gain that trust. Well, when you look at it from a political perspective, it is somebody who has, you know, a nefarious desire to discredit you, could use that to say, see, he messed it up again. Or, you know, in every single meeting he's messing something up, and just twist it and use it against you. And it's really an unfair tactic to use. So unfortunately, I learned this lesson too late. But you know, maybe your students will be able to learn from this. But in retrospect, what I should have done, if I had realized, is once I recognized who my audience was, because you can tell after a while, you can tell who are the people who are apt to use certain things for political gain. I could have used a different approach. So if our team did something well, maybe I would have said, I and my team, you know, did this, and give myself a little bit of credit. And only because of that, you because of the audience, right? And if something bad happened, instead of taking full blame, you say, hey, we had a hard time or we failed, and soften it a little bit so that a particular individual can't use it against you. And I hate that I even had to even think about a way to deal with it. But unfortunately, it was a reality that I didn't catch on to till much too late. Here's another example that again, I didn't learn until after some retrospect, and maybe your students can gain from this. So one of the lessons that we learn is to always be willing to do the right thing. And quite frankly, because your students come from where they come from, I know that the big majority, if not all of them, are fighters. They're going to want to do the right thing. They believe in equity, and they're going to take care of their subordinate because that's the right thing to do. And in that same fashion, that's exactly what I did. And whenever I saw something that was wrong, I was quick to go ahead and deal with it. I mean, it didn't matter if it was somebody that was higher ranking or whatever. I would respectfully, deal with it because if it's wrong, it's wrong. Well, it turns out that people who are politically savvy, once they catch on to that or caught on to that, what they would start doing, and I wish I had known this, I caught on with this earlier, is they would bring an issue to me, knowing that if it triggered a button that I would immediately say, hey, this is not right. Now, no matter what, even if I knew I probably would have done something about it, but I probably would have approached it differently if I'd known what this individual would do. But the point is that this individual would get me going, because it's something that this individual wanted as well. But now he had me dealing with it, and this individual didn't have to deal with any loss of political points or get involved with any of the mess that sometimes comes with some contentious issues. And it's very unfair, but you've got to be aware of your audience, and just especially when my advice would be to your students, and when they become field grade officers, especially senior majors and above, just be aware of your surroundings. And if you think that there are a couple of individuals that may be taking advantage of your good leadership, look for different approaches or different ways of exerting that good leadership.
It's interesting. My cadets will tell you that they're tired of me saying, three different things. Treat other people the way you want to be treated, do the right thing, and make our school and our organization and our world a better place. And I've always believed that if people follow those three tenets, then ultimately people are going to want to follow them. They're going to trust them. They're going to believe in them as human beings, believe in them as leaders, believe in supporting them and coming alongside them. And the unfortunate reality is that there is evil in this world. There are people in this world who don't do the right thing, who don't treat other people the way they want to be treated, who are not making our world a better place. And sometimes those people get into positions of power. And, there are certainly people who are in senior officer ranks and general officer ranks, flag officer ranks in the Navy and in the Coast Guard that have gotten into those positions because they've successfully skirted those three basic principles, and they've basically fooled people into not seeing them for who they are. But I've always sort of had this Pollyannish view that ultimately people get what's coming to them, and that, there is such a thing as, a version of karma, or whatever you want to call it, that, if you treat other people the way you want to be treated, then eventually people are going to treat you well. And if you do the right thing, people are going to recognize that you're doing the right thing, and that's um, that's ultimately most important. And that if you are trying to make the organization better, and you're trying to make the world a better place by all that you say and do, that ultimately you're going to be on the winning side. And that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be battles that you lose. I mean, there are going to be battles that get lost, and there's going to be some ugly moments, and there's going to be some stressful, some depressing, very sad times that you don't understand why things aren't going the way you want to go, because you did treat other people the way you wanted, and you tried to do the right thing, and you tried to make things better, but still something bad happens to you. And I guess my one, the one comment that I've made to students, and that I would just, in follow up to your comment, is that, ultimately, I would never advise my cadets or anybody that I care about to do anything other than those three things. And that, that doesn't mean that you allow people to run over you. It doesn't mean that you allow yourself to get abused. It doesn't mean that, if somebody is actively trying to work against you and against what you know to be right, it doesn't mean that that's not going to happen. And it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to fight against evil. There are and as you said, sometimes there are people who are above you who, have to be called on their inappropriate behavior, or lack of morality, or lack of professional ethics, or whatever. And sometimes that there are negative consequences that come from that. I worked for a boss for a long time, who was verbally abusive to everybody, and to me in particular. And eventually I left that situation, and it felt very good to get away from that situation. But I look back on it, and I realize, I still tried to do the right thing, and I still tried to treat people the way I want to be treated, and I still tried to make things better. And ultimately that's how we're all judged, and when you look back on your Army career, I suspect that people who worked with you and for you, and for whom you worked, would argue that you were a leader that tried to treat people the way you wanted to be treated. You did the right thing. You tried to make the organizations that you were belonging to better. And, for that, I certainly am thankful that I know you, and know the kind of leader that you became. We've got 90 seconds left. Are there any other kind of concluding thoughts that you'd like to make?
Well, with 90 seconds, what I want to say, if I can speak to your students, you guys have so much to offer, and you probably don't even know how important it is for you to lead soldiers in our Army. You have no idea how much your experience, your fight, your leadership experiences that you're receiving in your school will make such a big difference in our military, and in our nation for that matter. If you do join the military, please consider joining the officer ranks, because we need you to level set the officer ranks, and bring in that perspective, and take care of those soldiers, because those soldiers, they yearn for good leadership. They yearn for people who understand. They yearn for the people who've been there in the same areas that they've been in, and that understand what they've been through, and who can relate to the experiences that they've had. I can tell you numerous, whether it was in combat, whether it's in the field, soldiers who come up to me, and because they knew that they could trust me, because I would do anything for them, and that we understood each other, because they knew where I came from, and they knew that I was down to earth and understood how they were because of the way I was. And you're the exact same way. We need you as officers in the department. Dr. Ryan, sir, thank you very much for this opportunity. Please don't be a stranger. You know how to reach